has this, right? So a simultaneous eigenvector of H1 and H2 is also a simultaneous eigenvector of H1 plus H2. And that works for, in fact, not only H1 plus H2, you can take any linear combination whatsoever of the matrices H1 and H2. And a vector which is a simultaneous eigenvector of both of these will be a simultaneous eigenvector of the combination, right? Now, why is that an advantage? Because now the eigenvalues, notice that lambda 1 plus lambda 2 is now the eigenvalue, right? You may be able to find enough distinct eigenvalues by doing this. Okay.
Yes, sir. But
And now it's up to
theoretically,
you.
yeah.
You have to be clever. This one is pretty straightforward. The one which I gave you, you don't really need to work very hard to do this. Of course, the other option is if you have a degenerate eigenvalue, for example, say a two-fold degenerate eigenvalue, you don't have any degeneracy whatsoever, then your job is already done. But suppose you have a two-fold degenerate eigenvalue, that means that there are two independent eigenvectors, both of which are eigenvectors corresponding to the same eigenvalue for this particular matrix, let's say H3. Now, these two vectors will not be eigenvectors in general of H1, H2. If they are, fine, but they may not be. But then some linear combination of these two will be. And that is much easier to find out than, so that will essentially give you only a two-dimensional problem. 2 by 2 matrix problem. Okay. That would be much, much easier to work with than the full problem. So that's another approach. But a clever trick is just to combine the matrices correctly and you will find eigenvectors. We'll only do distinct eigenvalues so that you can easily figure out the independent eigenvectors. Just try it. It's not very difficult.
Yes, sir. I did try it, sir. But then, is there like a? My question is like, is there like a smart way to figure out the linear problem?
Not really. So Burnside's method can be automated by a computer, but then at one point you need a root search. There are, by the way, I told you that there are other much more sophisticated ways of finding out the character table. And some of them are implemented on computer programs which are readily available. But we are really not interested in all of that because for us, it's basically important to know that we can do this if we have to. But in most cases, we will find the character tables given for us. Okay. That is, most of the useful groups, the ones which we will need to worry about, are ones for which the character tables have already been found. So we can just look up a table. But there are smarter ways of doing this. Burnside's method can only be pushed so far. There are other smarter ways, but that will take us a long way into lots of technical mathematics, which we don't really want to go into right now. As far as physics applications are concerned, you can just use a ready-made table. And for most groups which are of importance in physics, ready-made tables are already available.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But try this one. This one is not very difficult. You should be able to figure it out yourself.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes.
I took the I made the H values. I found the H values, and I didn't took your I defined the classes differently rather than yours. And it turned out that the H4 value I am getting, it has all the distinct eigenvalues somehow, like 0, 2, minus 2, root.
That's
yeah,
possible.
but the problem was that two of them was root 2 and minus root 2, right? So that turned out that the d squares I am getting afterwards, making the table, that turned out to be like 8 by 5 and
no,
some
that means you may have made a mistake. Just check. That cannot happen.
No, like
okay.
if the values are coming like root 2 and minus root 2, then the eigenvectors have to be like 1 0 0 root 2 1, something like that.
Yeah, fine.
So, but then the d square values but the d square values are coming somewhat like 8 by 5.
Fractional, right? That means there's some mistake somewhere down the line. So just check whether your age matrix calculations have been right. You may have, look, if you reorder your the class, once you have found the right classes, right? Classes you can't change. You may relabel your classes, right?
Yeah, that's what I did. AB I took as C1 and
So
CD
that's
as
fine.
C2.
If you relabel your
Did
classes,
differently.
that will not change a huge lot.
Yeah.
So what you are saying may not be correct. Just check that. Check your calculation. You may have made a simple mistake somewhere.
Okay, but can this happen that
No, it can't happen.
it is
You can't have fractional deals, right? And
yeah.
the theory clearly says that the Dirac characters can directly give you the dimensionalities of the space of the irreps perfectly well. And if a calculation is giving you a dimensionality of an irrep which is fractional, that means there's something wrong either with your formula or the theory or with your calculation. Okay? So just check your calculation again.
Okay, I'll check it.
Okay, any further questions?
Sir, in question 3, we have
Hmm.
to find the diagonal projection operators, and then from that, I
Yeah.
think we have to construct the matrix that will block diagonalize all the representation matrices.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the lecture, did you talk about, what do we do after we find the projection, like the diagonal projection
No,
operator?
once you have the projection operators, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to apply them on the vectors, right? That's why
Yes,
they are
yes,
projection
I did
operators.
that.
And that
Yeah.
will give you the basis vectors. Okay?
Yes.
Now, if you have the basis vectors, then the rest is trivial linear algebra. You just put them together. Okay,
So
in a
you
column
mean I
matrix.
got four basis matrices, and I make the normal change of basis matrix the way I write in linear algebra.
Yeah.
You mean that?
Yeah, right. It is a normal. After that, it's normal linear algebra, right? The point is you had an original basis in which your matrices were not block diagonal. Okay. Now you're changing your basis to a new one, in which if you have got the correct basis, then your block matrices will become block diagonal, right? So the projection operator approach is simply a way to guarantee that what you're going to get is the correct basis in that sense. There's something which makes all the matrices block diagonal. So it's just a change of basis after that. You had E1,
Yes,
E2,
yes.
E3, let's say, and then you have E1 prime, E2 prime, E3 prime. How you change your basis is standard linear algebra. And here is just take those vectors, form an S matrix out of them by putting them as the columns of a Y matrix and so on. You've done that before when you diagonalize, right? It's the same thing.
Yes, yes. I did the same thing. Just I wanted to confirm that.
Yeah.
So, but then the order of these basis elements plays a very important role in diagonalizing the matrix, right?
No, the order of the matrix, if you change the order of these basis vectors, all that will happen is that the block diagonal form will look different. Now, for example, if you look at the Wigner-Eckart statement that he made, right? The one about, that was not about the representation matrices themselves, but about a matrix which commutes with all the representation matrices. We say that you will get a block diagonal form, but which doesn't look very nicely block diagonal. You will get something which looks like this, perhaps. Then you will have non-zero elements like this, and then you will have non-zero elements here and here. And then non-zero elements here and here. But these will be zero. That is, if you remember what I'm talking about, is a situation where you have two 1D reps in your representation, two different 1D reps, and then you have two different 2D reps. Sorry, not two different 2D reps, two copies of the same 2D rep. Then it's not guaranteed that this element is going to be non-zero. This element can be zero because it can be non-zero. Okay. While it's not guaranteed that it will be non-zero, it can be non-zero. As a result, what happens is I put in way too many zeros out there, I guess. Is that although you do get a block diagonal structure which is this big a block, and then of course there are two 1x1 blocks here. While you do get that, you can make it into an even neater block by rearranging the basis vectors. Okay. So basically what you would do is when you take the, now of course if you change the order of your basis vectors, the actual block diagonal structure that you will get will look different. But that's always the case, right? But the point is, suppose you had suppose I have a situation like this. I have this. Let's talk of S3, A1, A2, and E. Let's say I have a representation which is like this. I think that was basically what I had there. I don't remember. That is, E is this two-dimensional representation. Okay. Now that means you have 4 basis vectors now, 1 for A1, 1 for A2, and 2 for E. Now, the only thing that you have to bear in mind is that you have to keep the 2 E basis vectors next to each other. Is my point clear? That is, suppose these basis vectors were E1, E2, E3, and E4. And E3 and E4 are for both for E. Suppose I have something like this. Okay. Now, if I use E1, E2, E3, E4 in this order, what I will get is a matrix which looks like and then this block, right? This is what all the matrices will look like. E1 will give you this piece, the one which transforms, the one part which transforms like A1. E2 will give you this piece. E3 and E4 will together will give you this piece. Now, if I instead use this order, E1, E3, E4, E2, my machine seems to be highly slow, so it's not even writing right. Then what will happen is the block diagonal structure for each of the matrices will look like this. Okay. It's still block diagonal, it will look different simply because you place your bases differently. If you put the E3, E4 ahead of E1, E2, then the block diagonal structure will come at the top left corner. Now, what will make things look bad is if you took E1, E2, let's say E1, E3, E2, E4 in that order. Okay, that is, you broke up the 2 basis vectors for E, put them not adjacent to each other, but with an E2 in the middle. If you do that, sorry, because I can't see what I'm doing right now. So let me just try one thing. Let me close this and come back again. I think too many things are open. Yeah. Too many things open. Okay. Let's see. Suppose we have E1, E3, E2, E4, this order. There's a choice. There's a possible order choice, but not a very good order choice for our purpose, because now all our representation matrices will end up looking like this. Okay. Not a good thing to do because it completely obscures the block diagonal structure which you actually have. All you need to do for that, suppose I wrote E3, E4, E1, E2. Then for each one of the matrices, the block diagonal structure will simply be top corner with E3, E4. Okay. So the only restriction here, of course, you can reorder your basis and then you get different block diagonal representations. That's fine. But you will get in general. The only restriction you have to obey in order to get the block diagonal structure is that basis vectors which are basis vectors from the same irrep, they will have to sit next to each other. If you don't obey that, then what will happen is that you will not get an obviously block diagonal structure. You will get something which looks like this. Does this make sense? Yes?
Yes, sir.
I'm still here, right? Okay, good. So that is the only thing you now. One thing is, of course, something you have to be very careful about. The projection operator, what do? You apply the projection operator on an arbitrary vector, and that gives you a basis vector of an irrep. Fine. But it might so happen that your projection vector operator acting on a particular vector gives you 0. Why? Because that original vector that you started out with did not have any component in that direction. Which is eminently possible. Okay. Then you'll have to try again. Okay. Well, let me just try to illustrate that with the next lecture that I have already almost prepared the next lecture, but there's still some time to go for that. So let me just explain what the molecular vibrations thing a bit in the class here. Unless you have, if anybody has any other questions so far? Any other questions? If not, I will just quickly give you a hint, overview of what the next video has, so that it will be easier for you perhaps to follow that. But any other questions? That's more important right now.
Sir, when we use the projection operators of a particular rep, say if it's a 1D rep and act on the basis vectors, we'll either get 0
Or
or
you get that.
okay.
You will
So
get a
suppose
vector in that. Yeah. Now,
so suppose we get a non-zero vector, then we need not proceed anymore, right? Like we need not act the projection operator on the other basis elements, right?
then you don't need to. You can try, but then what will you mean? Not on the other basis element? Okay, you mean on the other original basis elements, right?
Yes, yes.
By the way, you don't even have to apply the projection operator on a basis vector. You can apply the projection vector operator on any vector. It's just easier to apply it on a basis vector because it's already sitting there, right? I hope I made my point clear.
Okay.
After
So
you do that, you get a result, and if you have already got a result for a 1D rep, then you're done. Okay. You may try to confirm your result by applying this on other vectors, but you don't have to.
So if it is a 2D rep, then we'll get 2 vectors.
Yeah,
And,
but then look, you have to be careful. If it's a 2D rep, then you have 2 projection operators. If you are only using the diagonal projection operators, then you have two projection operators, right? You have P11 and you have P22.
yes.
Okay. P11 will give you the first a vector which resulting vector. If it's not 0, it will give you something which transforms like the first component in the 2D rep. Okay. And P22 acting on some vector will give you something which transforms like the second component. Clear? So those are 2 different projection operators which you have to use. The problem will be there is no problem even here. Again, if you had only one copy of an irrep, okay, in your reducible representation, which of course you know that already, right? Once you have a reducible representation, then using the character orthogonality theorem, you can figure out how many copies of each irrep is in there, right? If there's, and it doesn't matter whether it's a 1D irrep or a 2D irrep or a 3D irrep. If you know that there's only one copy of that irrep, then all you have to do is apply appropriate projection operators. And once you get a non-zero value, the most you have to do after that is perhaps normalize. Okay, especially if you want to, very often we will want to orthogonally diagonalize a matrix or something. Then very often what you would want to do is actually use normalized vectors, because that will give you an orthogonal matrix when you put them together. That's again ordinary linear algebra. Okay. The trouble will be if the same irrep occurs multiple times, even if it's a 1D irrep. Because then, if you have apply your projection operator on a vector, it will of course give you only one result, right? And that result will be the base. If it's non-zero, it will be the basis of one of the 1D irreps. But if there are multiple copies of the same 1D irrep occurring in your representation, then you will need other basis vectors for that for those other copies, and those will of course not be the same as this one. So you'll have to apply the projection operator again on other vectors to find that out. Did I make myself clear here?
Yes, sir.
In fact, the problem is even more than that. The problem is you would usually typically end up with sums of or linear combinations of vectors which transform the same way. Okay, so if you have two copies of, say, a 1D array, you may end up with the basis vector which does not transform, which actually transforms, of course, like that, but which may not be a very convenient thing because it's a sum of two of these copies that you would want. Okay, in fact, that's very much part of what I'm going to talk about now, because that happens in molecular vibrations all the time. So you have to be careful about that. Okay, anything else? If not, let me just give you a quick overview of the thing of the next video, basically. But so in the previous lecture, that what we had was we had this fictional molecule called triangulene, which of course was not very fictional. Ozone, for example, would be a good example. And what we knew that ultimately we have this force constant matrix curly F, which we had to diagonalize to find the normal modes. This was a 6-dimensional or 6x6 matrix. And so ultimately what you would have to do is diagonalize a 6x6 matrix. Now that may seem like is that very difficult to do, by the way, diagonalizing a 6x6 matrix? What's your opinion about that? Is diagonalizing a 6x6 matrix very difficult? Yes, if anybody is typing something,
you could do it with a computer, but
yeah, you can do it on a computer, right? Very easily. In fact, in this case, you can even do it by hand, for the simple reason that out of the 6 normal modes, I actually know that 3 will give you 0 frequencies, right? So 3 roots are already known, which means that if you try to write down the characteristic equation, of course, writing down the characteristic equation of a 6x6 matrix by hand is sort of huge amount of hard work. But having said that, even if it's a huge amount of hard work, okay, it can be done. And after that, you get a 6th order equation, but 3 of the roots are 0. You already know that. That means lambda cube will come out as a factor. So you have left with a cubic equation. So in principle, you can even do it by hand. If you find that too difficult, solving it by computer is trivial. In fact, you can use could just enter your force constant matrix as a NumPy array and then use the lineage.eig in NumPy to simply find out all the eigenvectors and eigenvalues. But there will be a problem if you try that. The problem will be the eigenvalues will come out fine. The eigenvectors, the trouble with that will be, especially because you have degenerate eigenvalues, the eigenvectors will come out mixed, right? The computer will just give you the best possible eigenvectors it can find out. But that may not really be, in fact, that is almost never very useful in understanding what the motion looks like. Because the simplicity that you, for example, the translation will come out not looking like translations at all, because they will come up mixed with other things. So let me just, so the point is, if you want to understand what the motion is going to be like, then you might even say all this using group theory for molecular vibrations is a waste of time. After all, even if you have, say, the C60 molecule, you get a 180 by 180 matrix. You can diagonalize a 180 by 180 matrix pretty simply by using NumPy, for example, or any other computer algebraic or computer numerical algorithm, whatever you want. It will take, of course, it will take some time to diagonalize a 180 by 180 matrix, but not very much time. In fact, hardly. The only major amount of time you will need is the time you need to enter the data. The rest is almost straightforward. The problem is interpreting your results after you get them, what kind of vibrations are they really talking about? That would be horribly difficult. Okay. So that is so what group theoretical techniques do for you here is it not just makes your calculations easier once you put in the group theory. More importantly, it makes it easy for you to understand the result and just visualize what is really happening. So let me try to give an example of that. And for this, what I'm going to talk about first is, let's see. This is a molecule. This is the same thing that we have been talking about, a triangular shaped molecule in the shape of an equilateral triangle. And the standard coordinate system x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, x6, and so on. The only thing that I'm doing new here is that instead of assuming that there is some arbitrary capital V, some, not necessarily arbitrary, but some complicated capital V of x1 through x6, which is the potential energy function for this, and which has a minimum where x1, x2, x3, x4, etc. are all 0. And then you do quadratic approximation and so on. I'm talking about a very specific model. I'm assuming that these are 3 balls connected by 3 identical springs. So basically the kind of small oscillation problem that you've done since class 12 or at least in class first year, second year and so on. 3 identical balls connected with 3 identical springs to form an equilateral triangle, which is the configuration where the springs are not stretched. Then you displace them, of course they stretch, and then you get some amount of energy, some variation. Now, of course, the potential energy here would be easy to calculate. All you need to do is find out how much the springs elongate, and use the elongation of the springs. Half kx square will give you half k delta L square. Will simply give you the potential energy contribution from each spring, and you have to add them together. Let me just quickly show you what the result is. And the small amplitude approximation, this is what the potential energy looks like. This is something you should be able to calculate yourself. It's pretty straightforward. I will explain how to do that in the video, but I'm pretty sure you should be able to do it yourself. Okay. So this is what ultimately the potential energy doesn't end up looking very simple. It has this rather complicated looking expression. And that means if you try reading of the force constant matrix from here, of course, one thing that you can see here is the potential energy is quadratic already, simply because we actually made the quadratic approximation when we wrote this down. So question, is this an approximation or is this exact? After all, we are dealing with springs now, ideal springs, which obey Hooke's law. So is this expression, which is quadratic, is it an approximation for small oscillations or an exact one? So what would you say? Yes. So this rather complicated looking expression. Remember we had springs, right? For springs I know how to calculate the potential energy. Let's find out the elongation, square that, multiply by half k, that is half m omega 0 square, and add up. Yes? Come on, tell me. Is this exact or approximate? Well, okay, let me tell you, this is approximate simply because the actual form of the potential energy is really rather complicated. If you just did your geometry, the moment things can move, if things move only along the length of the spring, of course the elongation is simply x2 minus x1, how much the endpoints move. But because here the things can move at an angle with the spring, the actual formula for the elongation is a rather complicated thing in a square root. There's many terms, and I've just kept the lowest order term. That is the lowest order non-trivial terms, which are quadratic. So this is pretty straightforward. You can figure it out by the in a simple manner. The really important thing is, well, if you expand it out, this is what it looks like. Horribly complicated. Always really not that difficult a thing. But the reason why you needed to expand it out is that now you can immediately read off from the coefficients the post constant matrix, which turns out to be this one. Okay. So I would say that despite what I said a while ago, that it should be pretty easy to find out the eigenvalues and eigenvectors here. After all, 6 by 6 is not that big a number. It may look pretty well, daunting, at least. The 6 by 6 matrix is not real, even for such a simple problem. Let me point out that this is the simplest possible case of the kind of problem we are trying to talk about. The actual potential energy could have been much more complicated, but even with just 3 springs joining 3 balls, this is how complicated this post constant matrix actually looks. So, now this was essentially designed to scare you into, at least impress you rather, because I'm showing you how complicated the problem is, and once you manage to solve it using group theory, then at least the power of group theory will be more apparent. So now, let's go back and let's talk about the basic, how to actually figure this out. Now, remember our force constant matrix, even this one, must commute with all the representation matrices for all the symmetric group elements. So F commutes with dg for all small g belonging to capital G. Okay, and that is the key to us. In fact, if it so happens that my set of molecular vibrations had given me an irreducible representation of the group capital G, then my life would have been very simple, because then F would have been something which commutes with every matrix in an irreducible representation, and Schur's second lemma would have told you that F must be a multiple of an identity. Multiple of an identity is trivial, and of course that's not the correct, right? Our F is not a multiple of the identity. It's really very, very complicated. So that actually could have been a sign that we are not dealing with a irreducible representation. We are dealing with a reducible one. But we had already found out the reduction. In the last lecture, we worked it out, that the particular bunch of molecular vibrations actually can be split into a one-dimensional adept, another one-dimensional adept, not 2 copies of the same adept, but 1 copy each of one-dimensional adepts and 2 copies of the 2-dimensional adept. And then we had also argued that among these, A2 actually was rotation, and one of the E's were the 2 translations. And therefore, if you just look at the vibrational modes, there's really dA1 and 1 copy of D. So if you can stick to purely vibrational modes, we will immediately get the basis vectors for E as well. But if you don't do that, your 2 copies of DE in your representation, so you would usually end up getting linear combinations of both. And that is going to be important in what I'm going to talk about next.
Sir,
So,
could
yeah.
you repeat how you found that the representation for vibrational modes is
Yeah. The point is that
dA1
this is the representation for all of my molecular vibrations, which includes also the body modes. There is translation and rotation, right? Now, A2 is a rotation. Why is A2 a rotation? Well, we will see that soon. Okay, there's one. In the rotations, the rotational mode transforms like A2. Okay, so that's taken out, and that the 2 translational modes along X and Y transform like E is trivial, right? E is this 2-dimensional representation that we get because by considering 2-dimensional vectors in a plane, right? Translations along the X and the Y are parameterized by what? Translation vectors in a plane. So translations, of course, will transform like E. Okay. So basically what we have done is we have identified the body modes and you have just taken them away from all the those that we have here. And that tells us the rest. For example, A1, which is the identity representation, that must be a vibrational mode. A2 actually isn't. Okay, I did not tell you how to identify A2 as a rotation. We are going to do that soon. Okay. But But the fact that translation is one of the DEs is pretty straightforward. You just think of translating the triangle along X and then along Y. Then when you rotate, you just get a combination of these two translations, right? But translations are just 2D vectors. And DE, this particular 2D representation, is just one furnished by 2D vectors. So at least one copy of the DEs has to be the translations. Is that okay now? For the time being, at least. Until I show you that A2 really is a rotation. Actually, I think I did show it long time back, sometime. But let me just go. Okay, is that okay now? Can I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the point is, what we want to understand is the nature of this matrix F, which commutes with all the DGs. Now, all these DGs look like this. Okay. This red dot here is a non-zero element due to A1, which transforms like the identity. The pink one here is the basis, the matrix element corresponding to the basis which transforms like A2. These two and these two give you the 2x2 copies of the same irrep. They both transform in exactly the same manner. That is basically what if you were to label these vectors E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, E6, right? The columns are labeled by basis vectors, so are the rows. So this is the E3, E3 element. And this is, for example, the E5, E5 element. The point is E3 and E4, under the action of G, transform in a particular manner. That is why E3 mixes with E4. That is why this element is also not zero. And E4 mixes with E3. That gives you the 2x2 block. E5, E6 transforms in exactly the same manner as E3, E4 does. So for example, if E3, E4 goes to just say, after transformation, E3 becomes 1 by root 2. Say you have 1 by root 2 here, and let's say 1 by root 2 here. Then you will also have a 1 by root 2 here and a 1 by root 2 here. Same coefficients. Same matrix repeated twice. But this is, of course, something which happens only if you have managed to find the basis which block diagonalizes all the DGs. Okay? DGs will not, the 6 by 6 DG matrices will not look like this at the beginning. We actually have found out what the DG matrices look like, and they don't look like this at all. At least not all of them. But once you find the right basis choice, that is, you move away from the original E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, E6 basis that you used, but go over to a linear combination of those basis vectors, which manages to block diagonalize the matrices. This is what your DG for each and every one of the Gs will look like. Everyone will have this structure. Okay. And what the Wigner-Eckart theorem tells us is that a matrix F which commutes with all of these will in general have matrix elements like this. This one will be sitting alone in its own way. It can have no non-zero matrix element with anything else. Same goes for here. Just hold on. Hello? Okay. So basically, what the important thing about the Wigner-Eckart theorem is that it tells you that these two matrix elements, for example, same irrep, same copy of the irrep, not just same irrep, same copy of the irrep, different basis vectors, that is 1 and 2, first and second, will have exactly the same matrix elements. Again, another copy, but a different copy, but these two belong to the same copy of the irrep. These two vectors will be the same. But what is important is the first basis vector of this irrep and the first basis vector of this irrep may have a non-zero matrix element here. Okay. But, and then if this is non-zero, this will also be non-zero. In fact, this will be exactly equal. But these values will be different possibly from these other values. That's what hopefully the color coding should be able to indicate to you. That's a general scenario. It so happens that in our particular example, because one of the DEs is a translation, can show that translations do not mix with vibrations. That means if this is a vibrational block, this is a translational block, these components will also be non-zero to begin with. So basically, in our case, if I can manage to find the basis set of basis vectors which block diagonalize all the DGs, then I have actually found out a basis vector which ends up diagonalizing your curly F completely. Nothing else needs to be done. Is my point clear? Yes? Okay, am I still there? I get confused if nobody responds because I'm not sure whether I'm still connected. It shows me that I'm connected. Hopefully I am. Okay, anyway. Am I still connected, by the way? Just respond. Somebody just tell me.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But this is a new thing. Wigner-Eckardt theorem would have told you that these numbers could be non-zero. In fact, it would have told you that this number is exactly equal to this one. And these two are, of course, complex. This is, of course, complex conjugate to this. For real matrix, they are equal. In our particular case, because of the physics of the problem, these will also be zero. So our job will be trivial. Once I find out the basis vectors which actually diagonalize the matrix, I actually have managed to diagonalize curly F. And then reading of the eigenvalues will be no work at all. Okay, but how do I do that? I do that by looking at the projection operators. Okay, so which gives you this really nice basis. Okay, so what are the projection operators? Well, A1, what you need to do is multiply the different operators that you have that act on your vector space by the matrix elements of the irreps. For A1, where all the matrix elements of the irreps are just the number 1, you simply get this. For A2, you simply get this, because for A2, all the rotations are given by the, it is also one dimensional as a representation. All the rotations, E, D, and F, correspond to +1, A, B, C corresponds to -1. And that is what PA2 gives you. Well, PE11 is slightly more complicated because you have to now look at the 2x2 matrices. But if you look at the matrices, you will find that this is what PE11 looks like. Just look at the top left corner of each one of the representation matrices, pick up the numbers. They are 1, -1, half, half, -half, and -half. So that's what gives you PE11. This gives you PE22. Very similar, but the 2-2 matrix actually goes like 1, 1, -half, 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 -half. The matrices, of course, are more complicated. They have √3/2s, etc. in them, but they are in off-diagonal positions. If you look at the diagonal projection operators, this is all you really have. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So 4 projection operators. Let me just quickly show you what these projection operators do. So all you have to do is start with some arbitrary vector. Could be any vector. I've just taken a vector. Remember, we are in a 6-dimensional vector space, which means the vector will be 6-dimensional. I've just taken a vector with the first component 1, all the others 0, which means your vector, the first top molecule, top atom here is displaced to the left, to the right, sorry, and other atoms are not displaced at all. So this is your starting point. Let's start with this and let's see what happens. So this is LEV, right? LE means do nothing. So LEV is the same as V. LA would mean you are reflecting about this particular median. So LAV will simply be this flipped over. B is a reflection like this. That does 2 things. It moves this atom here and of course reflects the vector, which means the vector will now end up pointing like this. Okay, that's LBV for you. LC, this one. So this atom moves here and this vector which points like this will end up pointing like this when you reflect in a line like this. You should actually convince yourselves of this by drawing it yourselves on a piece of paper. It's much easier to understand that than by listening to me. Anyways, these are the 4 vectors. Then this is LDV. rotation through 120 degrees. This atom moves here and turns like this, and LFV. So what I've shown you on the picture are the 6 results of LE, LA, etc. acting on V, and PA1 acting on V is the sum of all of these. So the sum of all of these is how much?
0.
0, right? So it just so happened that the vector that we started out with, this vector V, which is the one which points where the top thing is displaced to the left, to the right, sorry. Left would also give the same thing. Ends up being something which is not, ends up giving you 0. That means basically your original vector had no component in the direction of the basis vector which transforms like A1. Okay? Yeah. Now, so this was a fail in the language of whatever social media people use nowadays. This particular atom did not work at all. But it's good to also see how, when it doesn't work, why it doesn't work. Here it doesn't work simply because your vector V had no component in the direction of the basis vector which transforms like A1. So you end up with 0 completely. So all you would have to do in such a case is start with another vector. There are infinitely many vectors to play with, right? You're in the 6-dimensional vector space. But usually you will not start with a very complicated vector. You start with a simple one. So let's say you start with this one. So vector V points straight up here. That is, here x E2 is the only one. So we start with E2 basically. E1 is 0. There's no E1. 0 times E1 plus 1 times E2 plus 0 times E3 plus 0 times E4 and so on. Now, once again, it's pretty straightforward. I will just quickly go through it. So if you don't have any difficulty, just ask. This is LEV, this is LAV, same, because you're reflecting along the median line, passing through A. LBV points like this, again, reflection like this, the vector pointing up that way ends up pointing this way. This is LCV, reflection along this line. LDV happens to be in the same direction as LCV, the same length, of course. You're just rotating the vector, the length doesn't change. And then you have LFV, which is the same as LBV. So when you add them all together, this is what your final sum looks like. This is what PA1 acting on V gives you. These 3 vectors, okay, of length 2 each. Now that you have this, you can easily write down this particular configuration in terms of your original vectors. Okay. For example, this component is 0. This component I've taken to be 1 because after all, I will normalize it later. So I don't bother with writing this as 2. I'll just take this as 0. This component is 1. E3 component is minus √3 by 2 because it's pointing the other way, and this angle, of course, is 30 degrees. And E4 component is minus half because it's pointing, this is the way E4 points, this one is pointing down. E5 plus √3 by 2 along this, making an angle 30 degrees, cos 30, this is just cos 30. And this is sin 30 with the minus sign, simply because it's pointing out. So this is a vector which describes this particular displacement. You could have done this whole thing algebraically just by starting with 0, 1. That is your original vector, and applying PA1 using the matrices instead of LE, LA, LB, LC, just use DE, DB, DC, DD. All the 6 by 6 matrices, apply that on this matrix 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, this column vector. You are going to end up with this. Actually, you're going to end up with 0, 2, minus √3, minus 1, √3, minus 1. Double of whatever this column vector is. But the vector that we are actually talking about is 1 by √3 times that, simply because that's the normalization. And it's easy to see that the normalization will be 1 by √3. After all, if you have 3 unit vectors, their length squares, of course, add up to 3, right? So you have to divide by 1 by √3. So is this clear to everybody? Any confusions about this? If not, let's move on. But notice that this has to be one of the vibrational modes. And because this is a vibrational mode, what does this tell you about the molecule? The molecule essentially, all the atoms move out together. So the entire molecule expands as a whole, stays a triangular matrix, stays a triangle at all times, but it keeps on, it becomes a bigger triangle. And of course, the oscillation doesn't occur with only positive component, it also takes negative components, which means all the three are going to move in. So basically, the triangle expands and contracts. So this is the so-called breathing mode, where this kind of insight is very difficult to get if you just use the computer algebra. Right? That will give you an eigenvector, but from the numbers you get, it will be very difficult to understand that this is really what is happening. The whole thing is moving out and coming back in. Quickly, PA2. This will give you the rotation. I'll just start with this vector V and show you what happens. LEV points this way, minus LAV. LAV, of course, pointed the other way. Minus LAV has to point the same way. Similarly, minus LBV, minus LCV, just opposite of what our LBV was like this. This is minus LBV, pointing the other way. Then you have LDV, which of course was opposite LCV and it get cancelled before. Remember, this V is the same as our first try, where we ended up with a 0. But now I have a different projection operator acting on it, and what was cancelling earlier is actually adding up. And now you end up with this, which of course is a rotation. Okay. All three atoms are displaced in a direction perpendicular to the line joining them with the center. If you just took the center, which is the centroid of this equilateral triangle as well, you drew a line from the center to each one of these displacements are perpendicular to that. That's exactly what happens in a rotation. And this is the corresponding column vector for that. Well, the non-trivial one. So, this also confirms what I said at the beginning, that the rotations transform like A2. Okay. Let's think of it this way. Suppose I applied a reflection, say this reflection. What would happen to this particular rotation? This vector would flip over. What would happen to this vector under this reflection? Yes? If I label the atoms A, B, and C, for example, what would happen to this particular displacement of B if I were to reflect along this line?
It will be now on the C atom.
It will now be on C. First of all, it will be a displacement of C, not of B, right? Because this atom will move from here to here. And then, which way will it be?
Opposite to the arrow already there.
Opposite to the arrow which is already there. And that also goes for this one. This one will reflect into this one, right? So what happens when you apply a reflection A on this particular configuration is that it reverses itself. Yes, multiplied by -1. What about B? Figure it out. If you reflect this one will flip over. This one will go, this atom will come here and will be turned around like this, and this one will go here and will be like this. Again, so A, B, C, all the three reflections reverse the rotation sense. The three rotations, identity, 120 degree and 240 degree, give you exactly the same configuration back. If I were to rotate this whole thing by 120 degrees, this one will come here, this one will go here, and so on. And will give you exactly the same configuration. This is exactly what reproduces the A2 representation. Plus sign for all the rotations, minus sign for the reflections. Okay? Clear? So I could have verified that A2 is a rotation just by drawing the rotation first and seeing what happens to it under E, A, B, C, D, F. Or I could start with an arbitrary vector, apply PA2 on that and get the rotation configuration, and hence then learn that rotation transforms like A2. Okay. But this is not a vibrational mode, so if I had already done this before, I would not have actually even bothered to talk about this now. I wouldn't have bothered to talk about PA2. But I need to talk about PE. PE11 is this one. So again, start with this vector. Apply. Half LB. Okay. LB would have been this big. Okay. Sorry for this being this small. I hope you can see this small blue arrowhead. Half as long as this one. Okay. Half LC minus half LD. Not very difficult to do this with geometry. Just figure out where it goes under the rotation, then multiply by minus half. That is half the length, flip it over. Now notice what happened. These two add up, right? These two add up, so do these two. But these two were equally long as V. So when you add them up, you get twice as long a vector. These two vectors, when you add them up, becomes as long as your original vector. Similarly here, so you end up with this configuration. You can easily write this down. Okay. That part is trivial. Just read off the components and so on. Use your basic cosines and sines of 60 degrees and so on. The only tricky thing that we have for you here is this. Notice that in our description, we already have learned that there are two copies of the two-dimensional irrep, right? The 2D irrep occurs twice. What that means, and this one, PE11 will project onto the first of the basis vectors of a 2D irrep. Okay, the one which transforms like the X, the E1 vector or the X or the I hat vector, the vector which is unit vector along the X direction. Unfortunately, that could be both a vibration or a translation, or what is more commonly the case, a combination of the two. Some of both of them with some coefficients. Okay. Is that clear? So how can we be sure that I've got a vibration? In fact, my claim is this is not a vibration. This mode that I have got drawn for you is actually a combination of vibration and a translation. But can anybody see why this has a translational piece in it? Yes? If this were the way the atoms were displaced, the molecule will not only vibrate, it will also translate as a whole. Can you see why?
Is it because the B and C atoms have a component in the right direction?
Yeah, all of them have components. So then,
I mean,
why
the
am I?
A atom is also moving.
Yeah, everything is moving. Fine. But everything moves in a vibration as well. Why am I so sure that it is not just a vibration? If you started out the molecule like this, what it will do is it will vibrate. It will sort of, the atoms will keep on going back and forth, but the whole thing will translate. So it will be like sort of something which keeps on oscillating but moving at the same time. It is moving along the x-axis at the same time. How are we so sure about that? Yes, it's very easy actually. Okay. 3 points making a triangle or any rigid body. When it translates, what happens to the center of mass? When a rigid body translates, what happens to the center of mass?
Center of mass also translates.
Yes. Center of mass also translates by an equal amount. So one easy way of getting rid of translations, here of course you can see each of these these atoms have a displacement to, okay, you can easily find out the translation of the center of mass because these two, there's no vertical displacement, they cancel out, right? Equally long vectors pointing along these two directions. You just added the vectors, you would actually usually have to mass weight them. That is M1 R1 plus M2 R2 plus M3 R3 is what you would want to do. But here all the M's are equal. If you just added them together, you would get a vector in this direction. By the way, if this vector has length V, can anybody tell me how much the sum of these three vectors would be? M1 R1 plus M2 R2 plus M3 R3. So I'm going back to thinking of these three as three individual 2D vectors rather than a 6-dimensional vector. But what would M1 say M times R1 plus R2 plus R3? Sum of these three vectors. How much would that be? Come on. Okay, when I add this vector with this vector, how much is the sum? Assuming that you can move them to one point and then add them together, which is what we're doing here. When I say M sigma Mi Ri have to be 0. Here, what will it be?
Twice.
When you add these two vectors, will the length become? First of all, which direction will it be in?
Towards the right. As in, if you add all the three
Towards
vectors,
the
it will be twice the length.
Twice the length.
All the three vectors.
Just these two vectors.
Okay, just those two vectors, you will get half plus half 1 along the right x direction.
You will get a length which is equal to this one, right? Same length along the horizontal direction. But then this length, remember, is half of this length, right? So when you add all three together, you will get 3/2 times this length. 1.5 times along this. Okay? Clear? Remember, these three vectors are not equal in length. These two vectors are half as long as this one. Just going back. This is the scenario. LE, LA were same length as V. So when you add them together, you get 2V. These vectors were half as long. So you just got a V. Right? So in the final sum, this is twice as long. This is half. This is just 1 unit long. So when you add them together, this gives you one unit long. 2 and 1, this gives you 3 units. So 3/2 times whatever this is. Okay. So that means that there is a non-zero displacement of the center of mass, which of course means that the whole thing is also translating, not just vibrating. Now, I already know that this has to be a combination of vibrational mode and a translational mode because PE11 will only project onto something which transforms like the first vector in this 2-dimensional array. It only happens to be in our case that there are 2 copies of the 2-dimensional array. So there are 2 first vectors which transform like that. One of them is a translation. The other one is a vibration. So you're getting a combination of both. So this is the important physical point here. The rest is just mathematics and is something you can easily do by geometry. But the important physical point is this. P11 will usually not give you a vibration mode directly. It will give you a combination of both. But can you figure out how much is the translation, by the way? How much does the center of mass translate here? Under this, if you call this vector, let's say I call this vector V. Or, okay, this vector is 2V, right? Let's use that light language. I have already called this vector V, so this is 2V. How much is the translation of the center of mass? Come on. You did that in your class 12, I guess, class 11. I just found out M1 R1 plus M2 R2 plus M3 R3 for you. That's how much R1, R2, R3, remember, are displacements. They're not locations. They're displacement for each one of them. So M1, R1, so what is the center of mass is displacement? I found out that R1 plus R2 plus R3 is 3V. So how much does the center of mass move? Yes? Quickly. We don't have all day. Class 10 or 11. You know the displacement of each particle. You want to find out the displacement of the center of mass. Come on. Did I make all these things clear that R1 plus R2 plus R3 is 3V is that something which everybody understood? I hope. Anybody remember the formula for the center of mass? This makes me really worried. Am I still here? It seems that I'm still here. Now I'm getting worried because if nobody responds to the formula for the center of mass, that seems a bit of an anticlimax in this class. Really, nobody remembers how the definition for the center of mass?
Sir, it moves by V.
Okay, in this case, it moves by V, right? Okay, that means you do remember the center of mass definition. So how do you get rid of the translation from here? This is a combination of translation and a vibration. And the translation is actually by V. M1 R1 plus M2 R2 plus M3 R3 by M1 plus M2 plus M3. Or in this case, simply R1 plus R2 plus R3 by 3. So that's the translation. How do you get rid of that? How you get rid of that is simply subtract that out. You just subtract a V from each one of these vectors. This one, of course, this one becomes just half as long as it is because it's already 2V. So it's V in this direction. If you subtract V from this, the vector ends up pointing this way. If you subtract V from this, the vector ends up pointing this way. So this is the vibrational mode. Okay. Now the other vibrational mode can be figured out along the same lines. That is, you use PE22, and then PE22 will also have a translation, and you can find out how much the translation is. You just subtract that out. And I will just quickly skip over that part. Give the final result. This is what the other mode looks like. I will try. Okay, I will leave it to your imagination. Try to figure out how the molecule actually looks as it translates. And it vibrates like this is the other vibrational mode. After you get rid of the translation, you should be able to figure out, or at least imagine, the shape of the molecule as it keeps on executing these vibrations. But let me just quickly point out that what is the advantage of all this? Now that you have this F matrix, I already know the eigenvector modes. For example, the translational mode, let's check the trivial one. Translational mode is 1 0 1 0 1 0. Equal translation. Apply curly F on that, you're going to get 0 times that. Okay, that's trivial, but it also tells you that there is no restoring force for translations. The other translation, vertical translation, again, nothing. This rotation, I just took that vector that we worked out there, applied F on it. Again, trivial, you will find the answer is 0. Okay, and again, that's not a surprise. This will happen almost obviously. Well, vibrational modes, this one. The important point is your job originally was to find out the eigenvalues and eigenvectors for this matrix. What group theory has done is given you this eigenvector. Now that you have this eigenvector, apply the matrix on it. You don't even have to apply the full matrix. Since you know it's an eigenvector, if you just find the top, well, the top component will not work because this is 0, it will just tell you 0 times whatever. But if you look, if you find the second component of the product, then will immediately tell you what the eigenvalue is. You'll check the eigenvalue is 3 omega 0 square. What that means is that this breathing mode actually has a frequency of square root of 3 times omega 0. So this triangle will oscillate at root 3 omega 0. Okay. So if you had a single spring that would have oscillated at omega 0, the same mass, the triangular situation has one mode which oscillates at root 3 omega 0. Well, take this particular mode, apply it. Trivially, you will find root 3 by 2 omega 0 as a frequency. Again, here the calculation is trivial. You don't even have to work out the whole thing. Just find out the top component. That will tell you what the eigenvalue is. But in any case, multiplying a matrix by a vector is very, very easy to do. Okay? Much easier, definitely, than trying to find out an eigenvector from scratch. Okay? So this is the point I was trying to make. You will ultimately end up with a much easier way of finding out eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Because the eigenvectors come out naturally from the group theoretical calculations. The eigenvalues sort of follow trivially after that. If you have the force constant matrix, the important point is, even if you did not have the force constant matrix handy, even if you did not know these numbers, you would still know that the eigenvectors are like that. That is, you will know the vibrational modes look like that. If you have the force constant matrix, that immediately gives you the eigenvalues, immediately gives you the normal frequency. Okay. So any questions? If not, I will just wrap up today. Do you have any questions? I will have finish the video and upload this, but the basic ideas are all here. So this was our first full-fledged application of group theory to a physical problem, which gave us physically important results out of this. So, final call. If you have a question, ask now. If you don't, we'll wind up. It seems nobody has a question. Fine, then, okay, then let's